My brother stole our dad's credit card and turned pale when he got home and said, "Who's the thief that stole my $20,000? I laughed. My name is David, and I'm 25 years old. If someone asked me to describe my family in one word, I'd probably say complicated. But let me start from the beginning, because this story needs context to make sense. I live with my parents and my younger brother in a modest 2-story house in suburban Ohio. My brother is 23, just 2 years younger than me. But sometimes it feels like we're from completely different planets. While I've been working since I turned 18, saving every penny I could get my hands on, dreaming about the day I could open my own auto repair shop, my brother has dedicated his life to what he calls enjoying his youth. Every weekend, without fail, he's out partying until dawn. He knows every bar in town, every club, every place where young people gather to drink and dance. His phone never stops buzzing with messages from different girls, and he changes girlfriends like he changes shirts. Last month, it was the blonde from the coffee shop. This month, it's the brunette who works at the mall. Meanwhile, I spend my weekends either working extra shifts at the garage where I'm employed or studying mechanical engineering books I borrowed from the library. I know it sounds boring to most people, but I have a plan. I've calculated that if I keep saving at this rate, in 2 more years I'll have enough money to rent a small space and buy the basic equipment I need. My parents see things very differently, though. They think my brother is charismatic and knows how to live life. They love hearing his stories about parties, about the adventures he has with his friends, about the girls who are crazy about him. When he comes home at 3 in the morning, reeking of alcohol and cigarettes, they just shake their heads with that indulgent smile parents give to their charming children. But when I come home from work, covered in grease and exhausted from a 12-hour shift, they barely look up from the television. "You work too much," my mother always says, as if it were a character defect. "You should go out more. Have fun like your brother." The irony is that my brother has never held a steady job in his life. He's had maybe 5 or 6 different jobs since graduating high school, but he never lasts more than a few months in any of them. There's always some excuse. The boss was unfair, the co-workers were boring, the schedule interfered with his social life. Right now, he's technically between jobs, which is a fancy way of saying he's unemployed. But somehow, he always has money for his night outs. He always has cash for drinks, for new clothes, for gas for his car. I've never asked where this money comes from because, honestly, I preferred not to know. I suspected our parents were giving him money, and that bothered me, but I tried to focus on my own goals. The contrast between us couldn't be more obvious. While I wear the same 3 pairs of jeans and rotate between work shirts and a couple of casual ones, my brother always has something new to wear. While I drive a 15-year-old pickup truck that I bought with my own money, he drives our dad's almost new sedan whenever he wants. Sometimes I wonder if they realize that being a hardworking person isn't a consolation prize. Sometimes I wonder if they understand that I'm building something real, something solid, while my brother is just floating through life without any direction. But I've learned to keep these thoughts to myself. In this house, questioning my brother's lifestyle is considered being jealous or resentful. So I just keep my head down. Keep working, keep saving, and keep dreaming about the day when I can prove that consistency and dedication are worth more than charm and empty promises. The worst part about living in my family isn't just the obvious favoritism, it's the way they justify it. My parents have convinced themselves that their different treatment of us is somehow fair, even logical. Take last month, for example. My brother came home from what he called a networking event, but what was obviously just another night of heavy drinking. He was so drunk he could barely stand, but instead of being angry, my father actually seemed impressed. "Look at him," he said to my mother. "He knows how to make connections, how to be social. That's how you get ahead in life." Meanwhile, that same week, I had worked 68 hours because one of the senior mechanics was out sick, and we had a deadline to meet. When I mentioned it at dinner, hoping for maybe a word of recognition, my mother just sighed and said, "You're going to burn yourself out. Work isn't everything." It's like they live in some alternate reality where being responsible and hardworking is a character flaw, while being reckless and irresponsible is a sign of having spirit and personality. My brother has figured out how to work this system perfectly. He knows exactly what to say to get our parents' approval. When he talks about his party adventures, he frames them as building relationships and expanding his social circle. When he talks about quitting jobs, it's because he's looking for the right opportunity, or because he refuses to settle for less than he deserves. And our parents eat it up. They nod along, completely convinced that his chronic unemployment is actually a sign of his high standards and ambition. They're so proud of him for not settling that they don't seem to notice he's never actually achieved anything. The financial double standard is even more obvious. Last week, my brother asked our dad for $200 to buy a new jacket. Not just any jacket, mind you, but a designer leather jacket he saw at the mall. Dad gave him the money without even asking why he needed such an expensive jacket. 2 months ago, I asked to borrow $50 because my work boots were literally falling apart, and I needed a new pair before my shift the next morning. Dad made me sit through a 20-minute lecture about budgeting and financial responsibility before reluctantly lending me the money, which I paid back in full the following week. The emotional wounds from this kind of treatment run deeper than I like to admit. Growing up, I always thought that if I just worked harder, if I just proved myself more, eventually our parents would recognize my efforts and give me the same respect they give my brother. But over the years, I've realized that's not how it works. They don't see my work ethic as admirable. They see it as boring. They don't see my savings as responsible. They see it as obsessive. They don't see my plans for the future as ambitious. They see them as small and unimaginative. My brother, on the other hand, can do no wrong. When he stumbles home drunk at 4 a.m. and wakes up the whole house, they laugh about it the next day. Young people will be young people, my mother always says, as if being 23 gives him a permanent pass to be inconsiderate and irresponsible. When he brings different girls home every few weeks, they think it's charming that he's so popular. When he spends entire days sleeping off hangovers instead of looking for work, they say he's taking time to figure out what he really wants to do. But what really hurts is how they talk about our futures. They're constantly making grand predictions about my brother's success. He's going to do something big someday, my father loves to say. He's got that spark, that charisma that opens doors. They talk about him like he's destined for greatness, like his current behavior is just a phase. When they talk about my future, if they talk about it at all, it's with this patronizing acceptance. David will always be fine, they say. He's steady, reliable. He'll always have work. They make it sound like being dependable is the participation trophy of life achievements. It started about 6 months ago, right around the time my brother quit his job at the electronics store. He'd only been there for 2 months, but according to him, the manager was totally unreasonable for expecting him to show up on time and actually work during his shifts. I was in my room counting the money I'd saved that month when my brother knocked on my door. This was unusual because we rarely talked unless we had to, and he never came to my room. "Hey, David," he said, leaning against my doorframe with that casual smile he uses when he wants something. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I should have known right then what was coming, but I was naive enough to think maybe he wanted to have an actual conversation, maybe even ask for advice about finding a new job. "I'm going out with some friends tonight," he continued, "and I'm a little short on cash. Could you lend me $40? I'll pay you back next week." The request caught me off guard, not because he was asking for money, but because he was asking me. I looked at the bills in my hand, money I'd earned by working extra shifts and skipping meals, and felt something twist in my stomach. "Why don't you ask Dad?" I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. His smile faltered just a little. "I already did. He said I need to learn to budget better, and that $40 is too much for one night out. So I was his second choice, his backup plan when our parents actually showed some financial sense for once. The realization stung, but what bothered me more was the assumption that I would just hand over money I'd worked so hard for. "I can't," I said simply. "I'm saving this for my business." The change in his expression was immediate. The friendly, casual mask slipped, and for a moment I saw something cold and calculating underneath. "Come on, man. It's just $40. You've got like thousands saved up. Don't be so stingy." Stingy? The word hit me like a slap. I worked 60 hours last week for this money. If you want cash for partying, get a job. Not everyone wants to spend their entire life covered in grease, he shot back. Some of us have bigger plans than fixing cars. I felt my temper flare, but I kept it under control. "Really? What are these big plans? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your plan is to live off our parents forever." He pushed off from the doorframe, and I could see I'd hit a nerve. "You know what? Forget it. I don't need your money anyway. I'll figure something else out." But he didn't forget it. Over the next few weeks, he came back 3 more times with similar requests. $25 for a concert, $30 for a date, $15 because he was completely broke until our dad gave him his weekly allowance. Each time, I said no. And each time, his attitude toward me got worse. He started making comments at dinner about how I was obsessed with money and how I counted every penny like some kind of miser. Our parents, predictably, took his side. "David, would it kill you to help your brother out once in a while?" my mother said after one particularly heated exchange. Families should support each other. I wanted to point out that support should go both ways, that I'd never asked any of them for anything, that I'd been completely self-sufficient since I was 18, but I knew it wouldn't matter. In their eyes, I was the selfish one for not sharing my hard-earned money with my unemployed brother. The breaking point came on a Friday night in March. I was getting ready for bed after a particularly exhausting week when my brother barged into my room without knocking. He was clearly tipsy, probably from drinking at home before going out, and his usual fake friendliness was completely gone. "I need $60, he announced, not asked. "No," I replied immediately. "Come on, David, don't be such a tight ass. It's not like you're using the money for anything fun." "I'm not using it for anything fun because I'm an adult with actual goals and responsibilities." He laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Goals? You mean that pathetic little garage dream of yours? You're going to spend your whole life fixing other people's broken cars? And you think that makes you better than me? At least I'm working towards something real instead of just partying my life away." "You know what your problem is?" he said, stepping closer to my bed. "You're jealous. You're jealous that people actually like me, that I know how to have fun, that I'm not some boring workaholic who counts pennies like an old man. And you know what your problem is?" I shot back, finally losing my patience. "You're a spoiled brat who's never had to work for anything in his life. You think the world owes you something just because you can charm our parents." The look he gave me then was pure hatred. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me. Instead, he just smiled that cold smile again. "We'll see about that," he said quietly, and walked out of my room. At the time, I thought it was just an empty threat. I had no idea that he was already planning to take what he wanted, whether I was willing to give it or not. It started small, so small that I questioned my own memory at first. I keep my money in a small metal box under my bed, hidden behind some old textbooks. I know the exact amount because I count it every week, tracking my progress toward my business goal. The first time I noticed a discrepancy was on a Tuesday morning in early April. I was sure I had $467, but when I counted, there were only $447. $20 was missing. I spent the entire day at work trying to figure out if I'd miscounted or if I'd spent the money and forgotten about it. But by the time I got home, I was certain something was wrong. I'd been tracking every penny for years. I don't make mistakes like that. Still, $20 seemed like such a small amount that I convinced myself I must have miscounted. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the stress of saving for so long was making me obsessive about every little detail. 2 weeks later, another $30 was gone. This time, there was no room for doubt. I'd counted the money the night before, and I distinctly remembered the total. $512. Now there were only $482. I felt sick to my stomach. Someone had been in my room, going through my things, stealing from me. In my own house, in what should have been my safe space, someone was taking the money I'd worked so hard to save. There was only one person it could be. I waited until my brother got home from whatever he'd been doing that day. He strolled in around dinner time, wearing a new shirt I'd never seen before, looking completely relaxed and carefree. "We need to talk," I said, following him up to his room. "About what?" he asked, but something in his voice told me he already knew. "About the money that's been disappearing from my room." He didn't even try to deny it. Didn't even look surprised that I'd figured it out. He just shrugged and sat down on his bed like we were discussing the weather. "Oh, that," he said casually. "I needed some cash, and you weren't exactly being cooperative with the whole lending thing." I stared at him, amazed by his complete lack of shame or remorse. "You stole from me. I borrowed from you. There's a difference. Borrowing implies you asked permission. This is stealing." He rolled his eyes like I was being dramatic. "Come on, David. It's not like you're going to miss $50 out of all that money you've got hoarded away. You act like every penny is sacred or something." "Every penny is sacred," I exploded. "Do you have any idea how hard I work for that money? Do you know what it means to me?" "Yeah, I know," he said, his tone becoming mocking. "It's for your precious little garage, your big dream of spending the rest of your life with your hands covered in motor oil." "At least I have a dream." At least I'm working towards something instead of just taking whatever I want from other people. Look, he said, standing up and facing me. I figured you'd probably notice eventually, and when you did, we'd work something out. I'm not trying to screw you over permanently. I'll pay you back when I get a job. When you get a job? You've been saying that for months. You don't even look for work. I'm being selective about opportunities, he said, using the same phrase our parents always used to defend his chronic unemployment. I'm not going to take just any crappy job like you did. The casual cruelty of that comment, the way he dismissed my work and my efforts, made something snap inside me. Get out of my room from now on, I said quietly. Stay away from my things, he laughed. Or what? You'll tell on me to Mommy and Daddy? Maybe I will. His smile faded. You know they won't believe you, right? Even if they do, they'll just think it's a misunderstanding between brothers. They'll probably make me apologize and then give me money to pay you back. The worst part was that he was probably right. Our parents had such a blind spot when it came to his behavior that they'd likely find a way to excuse even outright theft. Over the next month, the stealing continued and escalated. First, it was small amounts, $10 here, $15 there. But as I started hiding my money better, moving it to different locations, he became bolder. He'd take $20, then $30, then $40 at a time. The psychological impact was worse than the financial loss. Coming home from work and finding my money had been stolen again made me feel violated and helpless. It was my own brother, someone who was supposed to care about me, treating me like a personal ATM. But what really got to me was how normal he acted around the family. At dinner, he'd chat with our parents about his day, make jokes, ask about their work, all while knowing he'd stolen from me that morning. He'd even make comments about how hard I was working, as if he was proud of my dedication, all while spending the money he'd taken from me. I started sleeping with my remaining cash in my wallet, keeping it with me at all times, but even that didn't feel safe. I found myself constantly checking to make sure my money was still there, patting my pocket obsessively, unable to relax even when I was supposedly safe at home. By May, I'd become hyper-aware of my brother's patterns. He usually stole from me when the house was empty, or when he thought I wouldn't notice for a while. I'd started moving my money every few days, hiding it in different places around my room, but somehow he always found it. I was down to keeping just small amounts in my room and hiding the bulk of my savings in my car, locked in the glove compartment. It wasn't a perfect solution, but at least it gave me some peace of mind during the day. Then my father created the perfect storm of opportunity without even realizing it. It was a Thursday morning, and I was getting ready for work when Dad called me into his home office. He was sitting at his desk with his laptop open, looking frustrated with whatever he was trying to do online. David, I need your help with something, he said, holding up a piece of paper with some writing on it. Your mother wants me to order this watch for her birthday next week. It's one of those fancy fitness trackers she's been talking about. I looked at the paper. Mom had written down the exact model number and specifications of the watch she wanted, along with the website where Dad could order it. It cost $349. The problem is, Dad continued, I can never figure out these online stores. All the clicking and entering information and confirming this and that. It gives me a headache. You want me to order it for you? I asked. Would you mind? I'll give you my credit card and the password for my account. You can do it tonight when you get home from work, right? That way it'll arrive by Tuesday, and I can give it to her on Wednesday for her actual birthday. He pulled out his wallet and handed me his main credit card, the one he used for all major purchases. Then he wrote his online banking password on a sticky note and placed it on top of the card. Just charge it to this card, he said, and leave everything here on my desk when you're done. I'll put the card back in my wallet tomorrow morning. I took the card and the note, promising to take care of it as soon as I got home. Dad seemed relieved to have the task off his plate, and I was happy to help. It was such a simple request, and I knew I could have it done in 15 minutes. What I didn't realize was that my brother was standing right outside the office door, listening to every word of our conversation. I went off to work thinking nothing of it. The card and password were safe in my wallet, and I made a mental note to order the watch as soon as I got home around 7 o'clock. It was going to be a long day. We had 3 cars that needed to be finished before the weekend, but at least I had something easy to take care of afterward. Around noon, I got a text from my brother asking what time I'd be home. This was unusual because he never cared about my schedule, but I figured maybe our parents had asked him to help with something around the house. Around 7, I texted back. Why? Just wondering, he replied. I'm going out with friends later. I didn't think much of it. My brother went out with friends most nights, and his plans rarely affected me in any way. I finished my shift, helped lock up the garage, and drove home looking forward to getting the watch ordered quickly. The house was quiet when I walked in. Both of my parents' cars were in the driveway, but I could hear the television in their bedroom upstairs, which usually meant they were settling in for the night. My brother's shoes weren't by the front door, which meant he'd already left for whatever plans he had. I went straight to my dad's office, ready to take care of the online order. That's when I noticed something that should have been a red flag. The office door was closed. Dad never closed his office door unless he was having an important phone call or working on something private. But I was tired from work and focused on getting the task done, so I didn't think too much about it. I opened the door, flicked on the light, and went to the desk where I'd left the credit card and password earlier that morning. The card was exactly where I'd left it. The password note was still stuck to it. Everything looked normal, and I felt silly for even having a moment of suspicion. I sat down at Dad's computer, navigated to the website, and started the process of creating an account and adding the watch to the cart. It was exactly as straightforward as I'd expected it would be. But when I got to the payment screen and entered my dad's credit card information, something strange happened. The transaction was declined. I tried again, thinking maybe I'd mistyped the card number. Declined again. I checked the expiration date and security code. Everything was correct, but the payment kept getting rejected, and the website kept showing an error message about insufficient funds. That's when a cold feeling started spreading through my chest. I picked up the credit card and looked at it more carefully. It was definitely my dad's card. I'd seen him use it hundreds of times, but something was wrong. I opened a new browser window and logged into Dad's online banking account using the password he'd given me. What I saw made my stomach drop. The account balance showed $37.18. For a credit card that usually had a limit of $25,000, that meant someone had spent almost $25,000 very recently. My hands were shaking as I clicked on the transaction history. And there it was, purchase after purchase from earlier that day, starting around 11 in the morning and continuing until almost 5 o'clock. Designer clothing stores, electronics retailers, a travel booking site, restaurant charges, bar tabs, even a jewelry store purchase for over $2,000. Someone had gone on an absolute spending spree with my father's credit card, and I knew exactly who it was. I sat there staring at the computer screen, my heart pounding as I scrolled through page after page of transactions. $24,862. That's how much my brother had spent in a single day using our father's credit card. The purchases told a story of complete recklessness. $800 at a high-end clothing store, $1,200 at an electronics retailer, $3,000 at a luxury menswear boutique, $600 at a restaurant that I knew was one of the most expensive places in the city, and the biggest single purchase, $4,500 at a travel agency for what looked like a week-long vacation package to Miami. I printed out the transaction history, my hands shaking as I watched page after page come out of Dad's printer. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was financial devastation. This was going to destroy my parents when they found out. I heard the front door open around 9:30, followed by my brother's voice talking loudly to someone on his phone. He was clearly in a great mood, laughing and making plans for the weekend. I could hear him coming up the stairs, probably heading to his room. Instead, he stopped by the office door and poked his head in. "Hey, did you get that watch ordered for Mom?" he asked casually, as if he hadn't just committed a felony earlier that day. I turned around in the chair to face him, and I must have looked as sick as I felt because his expression immediately changed. "What's wrong?" he asked, but there was something in his voice that told me he already knew exactly what was wrong. "You want to tell me about your day?" I said quietly, holding up the printed transaction history. For just a second, I saw panic flash across his face, but then, incredibly, he smiled. That same confident, charming smile he used on our parents when he wanted something. "Oh, that," he said, walking into the office and closing the door behind him. "Yeah, I was going to talk to you about that. You were going to talk to me about stealing $25,000 from Dad?" "I didn't steal anything," he said, sitting down in the chair across from Dad's desk as if this were just a normal conversation. "I borrowed it. Same as I've been doing with your money, just on a larger scale." I stared at him, amazed once again by his complete inability to understand the seriousness of what he'd done. You can't borrow money without asking permission. That's called stealing. And you can't possibly pay this back. Sure I can, he said, but his confidence was starting to crack around the edges. I'll get a job, make payments. Dad will understand. Dad will understand that you spent $25,000 in one day? On clothes and restaurants and a vacation to Miami? His face flushed slightly. How do you know about Miami? Because I have the entire transaction history right here, I said, waving the papers. Every single purchase you made today. The question is, how are you going to explain this to Dad? I'm not, he said simply. You are. What? You're going to help me figure out how to handle this. We're brothers. This is what family does for each other. I felt like I was losing my mind. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't ruin each other financially, and family sure as hell doesn't ask each other to cover up major crimes. It's not a crime, he insisted. It's a family matter. It's fraud. It's identity theft. Do you have any idea what kind of legal trouble you could be in? For the first time, he looked genuinely worried. But instead of expressing remorse or asking for help figuring out how to make things right, he just got angry. This is all your fault anyway, he said, standing up and starting to pace around the small office. If you had just been reasonable about lending me money when I asked, none of this would have happened. My fault? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're blaming me for your decision to steal $25,000? I wouldn't have had to take such drastic measures if you hadn't been so selfish with your savings. You forced me into this situation. I stood up too, facing him across the desk. Nobody forced you to do anything. You chose to steal from me, and when that wasn't enough, you chose to steal from Dad. These were your decisions. Look, he said, his tone becoming more desperate. We can fix this. We can return some of the stuff I bought. We can cancel the Miami trip. We can figure out a payment plan for the rest. Some of the stuff. What about the $600 you spent at restaurants? What about the bar tabs? You can't return food and drinks. His face was getting redder, and I could see sweat starting to form on his forehead despite the cool evening air. The reality of what he'd done was finally starting to sink in. You know what the worst part is? I said quietly. This isn't even about the money anymore. Dad trusted you. He left his credit card information where you could see it, and instead of respecting that trust, you saw it as an opportunity to steal from him. I didn't plan it, he said weakly. I heard him talking to you about the watch, and I saw the card sitting there. And I don't know. I started thinking about all the things I needed, and before you knew it, you'd spent $25,000 that wasn't yours. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over both of us. Then I heard movement upstairs, our parents getting ready for bed. They're going to find out, I said. Dad will check his account tomorrow, or he'll try to use the card and it'll be declined. There's no way to hide this. My brother's face went pale. You can't tell them it was me. I don't have to tell them anything. The transaction history speaks for itself. David, please. For the first time since I'd known him, my brother was begging. You don't understand what this will do to me. They'll kick me out. They'll never forgive me. I looked at him sitting there, finally understanding the consequences of his actions, and I felt something strange happen. Instead of anger or satisfaction, I started to laugh. Not because anything was funny, but because the absurdity of the situation had finally hit me. Here was my brother, who had spent months stealing from me and treating me like I was selfish for not funding his lifestyle, now asking me to protect him from the consequences of stealing from our father. The same brother who had called me boring and pathetic, who had dismissed my dreams and mocked my work ethic, was now depending on me to save him. What's so funny? He asked, looking confused and hurt by my reaction. You, I said, still laughing. You're sitting here asking me to cover for you after everything you've done. Do you have any idea how ironic this is? I'm serious, David. I need your help. And I'm serious too, I said, my laughter fading. You're going to have to face Dad yourself. I'm not covering for you anymore. I barely slept that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd think about what was going to happen in the morning when Dad discovered what my brother had done. Part of me felt guilty for not warning our parents immediately, but a larger part of me felt like my brother needed to face the consequences of his actions on his own. Around 6 in the morning, I heard Dad's alarm go off. He was always an early riser, usually up by 6:30 to read the news and drink his coffee before getting ready for work. I lay in bed listening to his footsteps as he went downstairs to start his morning routine. I must have dozed off again because the next thing I heard was my father's voice, loud and angry, coming from downstairs. At first, I thought he might be on a work call that had gone badly, but then I heard my brother's name being shouted, and I knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. "What the hell is this?" Dad's voice boomed through the house. $25,000? I got up and quickly threw on some clothes, knowing I was probably going to be pulled into this situation whether I wanted to be or not. I could hear my mother's voice too now, confused and alarmed, asking what was happening. When I came downstairs, I found my father standing in the kitchen holding his laptop, his face redder than I'd ever seen it. My mother was beside him in her bathrobe, looking bewildered as she tried to read the screen over his shoulder. "Where is he?" Dad demanded when he saw me. "Where's your brother?" "I think he's still sleeping," I said, though I suspected my brother was probably awake and hiding in his room, hoping this whole thing would somehow blow over. "Well, he's not sleeping anymore," Dad said grimly, heading toward the stairs. "Not after what he's done." I followed them upstairs, along with my mother, who was still asking what was going on. Dad didn't bother knocking on my brother's door. He just threw it open and stormed into the room. My brother was indeed awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, fully dressed, as if he'd been preparing to make a quick escape. When he saw Dad's face, he went completely pale. "Dad, I can explain," he started to say. "Explain," Dad interrupted, his voice rising to a shout. "Explain how you stole $25,000 from me? Explain how you committed fraud with my credit card?" "It's not fraud," my brother said weakly. "I'm your son. I was going to pay you back." "Pay me back?" Dad was practically screaming now. "With what money? You don't have a job. You don't have any income. You don't have anything except what your mother and I give you." My mother had been looking back and forth between them, trying to piece together what was happening. "Someone please tell me what's going on," she said. Dad turned to her, still holding the laptop. "Your precious son used my credit card yesterday to go on a shopping spree. $25,000 in one day. Clothes, restaurants, electronics, even a vacation to Miami." The color drained from my mother's face as she looked at the screen. "That can't be right," she said quietly. "Oh, it's right," Dad said bitterly. "I have the receipts. I have the transaction history. I even checked my online account this morning to make sure it wasn't some kind of mistake. $24,862, to be exact." My brother tried to stand up, but Dad pointed a finger at him. "Sit down. Don't you dare try to leave this room." "Dad, please, let me explain what happened." "What happened?" Dad said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Is that my own son, who I've fed and housed and supported for 23 years, stole from me. What happened is that someone I trusted turned out to be a thief." The word thief hit my brother like a physical blow. I could see him flinch, and for a moment I thought he might break down completely. "I'm not a thief," he said desperately. "I just needed—" "You needed?" Dad's voice rose again. "You needed to spend $600 on dinner? You needed to buy a $2,000 watch? You needed to book a vacation to Miami? How did you even get the card information?" my mother asked, looking confused and hurt. My brother's eyes darted to me, and I could see him considering whether to throw me under the bus somehow. But there was no way to make this my fault, and he seemed to realize that. "It was sitting on Dad's desk," he admitted quietly. "When David was supposed to order Mom's watch." Dad turned to me. "You knew about this?" "I found out last night when I tried to place the order and the card was declined," I said. "That's when I checked the account and saw all the charges." "And you didn't think to tell us immediately?" "I confronted him about it," I said. "I thought he should be the one to tell you what he'd done." Dad nodded grimly, then turned back to my brother. "So you sat here all night knowing what you'd done, knowing you'd stolen from your own family, and you said nothing." "I was trying to figure out how to fix it," my brother said. "Fix it?" Dad laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to fix it? Fine. You can start by returning every single thing you bought yesterday. Every piece of clothing, every electronic device, everything that can be returned." "I already thought about that," my brother said. "Some of it can't be returned. The restaurants, the bars, then you'll work to pay back every penny," Dad said. "You'll get a job, a real job, and you'll work until you've paid back every cent you stole from me." My brother's face crumpled. "Dad, please, I know I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Dad's voice reached a new level of fury. "A mistake is forgetting to turn off the lights when you leave a room. A mistake is putting too much salt in the soup. What you did was a crime. You stole from your own family. For the first time since this whole confrontation began, My brother started to cry. Not the manipulative tears he'd used as a child to get out of trouble, but real, desperate sobs. "I'm sorry," he said through his tears. "I'm so sorry. I know it was wrong. I know I messed up. Please don't hate me." But Dad's expression didn't soften. If anything, he looked even more disgusted. "Don't you dare try to manipulate me with tears. You're 23 years old. You're old enough to understand the difference between right and wrong, and you chose wrong." The next few hours were a whirlwind of phone calls, arguments, and desperate attempts at damage control. Dad immediately called the credit card company to report the fraudulent charges, but since my brother was a family member with access to the card information, the situation was legally complicated. My mother sat at the kitchen table, still in her bathrobe, looking like someone had told her that everything she believed about the world was wrong. She kept staring at the transaction printouts, shaking her head in disbelief. "I don't understand," she kept saying. "This isn't who he is. This isn't how we raised him." Dad was less interested in understanding and more focused on practical solutions. He'd given my brother until noon to gather up everything he'd purchased and figure out what could be returned for cash versus store credit. "And I want receipts for everything," Dad said. "Every single purchase. If you threw away a receipt, you better hope the store can look it up in their system because I'm not taking your word for what anything cost." My brother spent the morning frantically calling stores, trying to explain his situation without admitting to fraud. Most places had return policies that required items to be in original condition, with tags attached, returned within a certain time frame, with receipt and original form of payment. The reality was devastating. Of the nearly $25,000 he'd spent, less than $8,000 could be returned for cash. The rest was either non-returnable like the restaurant and bar charges, only returnable for store credit, or had already been used or damaged. The Miami vacation was the biggest single loss. The travel agency explained that the booking was non-refundable, though they might be able to apply the credit to future travel if my brother wanted to pay a hefty change fee. "Future travel?" Dad said when my brother explained this. "You think you're going to be taking vacations anytime soon? Cancel it. I don't care if we lose the entire $4,500. You're not going to Miami." By afternoon, my brother had managed to return about $6,000 worth of merchandise. He came home with a small pile of cash and several store credit cards, looking exhausted and defeated. "That's it?" Dad asked, looking at the money. "6,000 out of 25,000? Some stores won't take returns without receipts," my brother explained. "And the restaurants obviously can't give refunds for food that's already been eaten." Dad picked up the stack of store credit cards. "What am I supposed to do with these? I don't shop at teen clothing stores or electronics boutiques." "Maybe we could sell them?" my brother suggested weakly. "For a fraction of their value, if anyone even wants them," Dad replied. "Do you realize what you've done? You've stolen nearly $20,000 that we'll never see again." The financial reality was sinking in for my parents. $20,000 wasn't just money they could write off. It was a significant portion of their savings, money they'd planned to use for home improvements and my mother's upcoming medical procedure. My mother finally spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "I think what hurts the most is the lying," she said, looking directly at my brother. "Not just about this, but about everything. We've been supporting you, giving you money, making excuses for you. And this whole time you've been stealing from David and planning to steal from us." My brother looked genuinely surprised that she knew about the money he'd taken from me. "You know about that?" "David told us this morning," she said, "about how you've been taking money from his room for months. Money he worked for. Money he was saving for his future." For the first time since this whole situation began, my brother looked ashamed rather than just scared or angry. Maybe it was easier to justify stealing from our parents because he saw them as authority figures who owed him support. But stealing from me, his brother who had never done anything but work hard and mind his own business, was harder to rationalize. "I was going to pay him back too," he said quietly. "With what?" Mom asked. "You don't work. You don't have any income. You don't have any way to pay anyone back." Dad had been making phone calls while my brother was out returning merchandise, and he came back into the kitchen with a piece of paper and a determined expression. "I found you a job," he announced. My brother looked up hopefully. "Really? Where?" "Morrison Manufacturing. They need workers for the night shift in their packaging department. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 6 days a week. The pay is $14 an hour." I could see my brother's face fall as he processed this information. Morrison Manufacturing was known throughout our town as one of the toughest, most demanding employers around. They hired people that other companies wouldn't touch, but they worked them hard for every penny they paid. Night shift? My brother asked. That's right. And before you even think about complaining, let me explain how this is going to work, Dad said, sitting down at the table. You're going to take this job and you're going to keep this job. Your entire paycheck, minus money for bus fare, is going to go toward paying back what you stole from me. My entire paycheck? What about food, clothes, other expenses? You'll eat what your mother cooks. You'll wear the clothes you already own. And you'll live in this house rent-free while you work off your debt. Consider yourself lucky that I'm not pressing charges and having you arrested. My brother was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to process the reality of working 60 hours a week at a physically demanding job just to pay back money he'd stolen. How long will it take? He asked finally. Dad pulled out a calculator. At $14 an hour, working 6 days a week, you'll make about $4,300 a month before taxes. After taxes, probably closer to $3,200. At that rate, it'll take you about 6 months to pay back what you can't return through merchandise. 6 months of night shift factory work. 6 months of having no social life, no spending money, no freedom. 6 months of facing the consequences of 1 day's worth of reckless spending. I start Monday night, my brother said quietly. Yes, you do, Dad confirmed. And if you quit, or if you get fired, or if you miss even 1 day without being sick enough to be in the hospital, you can find somewhere else to live. The old dynamic of our family had completely shifted in the span of a single day. My brother, who had been the favored son, the one who could do no wrong, was now viewed with suspicion and disappointment. And for the first time in years, my parents were looking at me with something that resembled respect and gratitude. The first week was almost entertaining to watch. My brother had never worked a physically demanding job in his life, and the night shift at Morrison Manufacturing was about as far from his comfort zone as possible. He'd leave the house at 10:30 p.m., looking nervous and exhausted before his shift even started. When he came home at 8 in the morning, he was covered in dust and grime, his clothes soaked with sweat, moving like every muscle in his body ached. It's brutal, he complained to our mother after his third night. We have to load boxes that weigh 30 to 50 pounds each, and we're expected to move at least 200 boxes per hour. My back is killing me. Mom looked sympathetic, which worried me. I could see her maternal instincts kicking in, wanting to comfort her son who was clearly suffering. But Dad was having none of it. Maybe you should have thought about that before you stole $25,000, he said coldly. Physical labor builds character. Maybe some honest work will teach you the value of money. For the first 2 weeks, my brother actually seemed to be trying. He got up for work every night, came home exhausted but without major complaints, and slowly started to understand what it meant to earn money through genuine effort rather than theft or manipulation. I thought maybe this experience might actually change him, might teach him the lessons our parents had failed to instill over the years. I was wrong. By the third week, his true nature started to emerge. He began calling in sick on Friday nights so he could go out with friends. When Dad confronted him about this, he claimed he was genuinely ill, but we all knew he was lying. If you're too sick to work, you're too sick to leave the house, Dad told him. Next time you call in sick, you better be here all weekend recovering. The following week, my brother tried a different approach. He started showing up late for his shifts, claiming traffic or bus delays. When his supervisor called our house to complain, Dad found out that my brother had been arriving anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour late multiple times. They said if it happens again, I'll be written up, my brother explained when Dad confronted him. But it's not my fault. The bus schedule is unreliable. Then take an earlier bus, Dad replied. Or walk. Or figure out another way to get there on time. Your transportation problems are not your employer's responsibility. But the real problem started in the fourth week, when my brother began actively resenting the work itself. He complained constantly about his coworkers, his supervisors, the working conditions, and the demands of the job. The supervisor is a complete jerk, he told us over dinner one evening. He treats everyone like slaves. And my coworkers are all uneducated losers who don't understand that I'm only there temporarily. I could see Dad's jaw tighten. Those uneducated losers show up on time and do their jobs without complaining. Maybe you could learn something from them. I'm better than that place, my brother continued. I shouldn't have to work in a factory like some kind of manual laborer. I have potential that's being wasted there. You have a debt that needs to be paid, Dad said firmly. And right now, Your potential is worth exactly what someone is willing to pay you for it, which is $14 an hour, assuming you can keep the job. The breaking point came during his 6th week at Morrison Manufacturing. My brother had been increasingly vocal about his dissatisfaction with the work, the hours, and the expectations. He'd started taking longer breaks than allowed, arguing with supervisors about productivity requirements, and generally making himself unpopular with everyone he worked with. On a Thursday night, he came home 2 hours early, still wearing his work clothes, but with a smug expression that immediately told me something was wrong. "How was work?" Mom asked as he walked into the kitchen. I told my supervisor exactly what I thought about his management style and his unrealistic expectations, he announced. Then I walked out. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad slowly put down his newspaper and looked at my brother with an expression I'd never seen before. "You quit," Dad repeated quietly. "That's right. I'm not going to let some high school dropout treat me like garbage just because I need the money. You quit the job that was paying for the money you stole from me." "I'll find something better," my brother said confidently. "Something more suited to my skills and abilities." Dad stood up from his chair, and for a moment I thought he might actually hit my brother. Instead, he just stared at him for a long moment. "Your skills and abilities," Dad said slowly. "You mean your skills at spending other people's money and your ability to make excuses for your failures? That's not fair," my brother protested. "I've been working hard for 6 weeks. You've been doing the bare minimum when you felt like it, and complaining constantly about having to do honest work to pay back money you stole. I said I'd find another job." "No," Dad said simply. "You had your chance. You had a job that would have allowed you to pay back your debt and prove that you could be responsible. Instead, you quit because the work was hard." My brother looked confused. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no. You don't get another chance. No. You don't get to find a different job that's more to your liking. No. You don't get to keep living here while you figure out your next move. I need to correct something from what I just told you. My brother didn't actually quit his job at Morrison Manufacturing. That was just the story he told us when he came home early that Thursday night. The truth was much worse, and we found out about it the next morning when his supervisor called our house. "I'm calling about your son," the supervisor said when Dad answered the phone. "He was terminated yesterday evening for insubordination and creating a hostile work environment." Dad put the phone on speaker so the whole family could hear. "What exactly happened?" "Well, it started about 2 weeks ago with attendance issues. He was consistently late, sometimes by over an hour. When we talked to him about it, he said it wasn't his fault and that we needed to be more understanding of his transportation challenges." I watched my brother's face as the supervisor continued. He was sitting at the kitchen table looking increasingly uncomfortable as the real story came out. Then there were the productivity issues. He couldn't keep up with the basic requirements of the job, and when other workers tried to help him, he told them he didn't need advice from people who would be working in factories their whole lives. Mom winced at this. Dad's expression was getting darker by the minute. The final straw was yesterday. He got into an argument with me about break times. Company policy allows for 2 15-minute breaks per shift, but he'd been taking 30 to 40-minute breaks. When I spoke to him about it, he told me that he was entitled to adequate rest time and that our policies were unreasonable. "Then what happened?" Dad asked, though I could tell he already knew this wasn't going to end well. He said, and I quote, "I don't have to listen to this from someone who probably never even graduated high school." Then he called me an ignorant supervisor who didn't recognize talent when I saw it. The silence in our kitchen was deafening. My brother was staring at his hands, no longer able to maintain eye contact with anyone. I told him that kind of attitude was unacceptable and that he needed to apologize and get back to work. Instead, he said he was too good for this job and that he deserved better treatment. That's when I terminated him. "I understand," Dad said quietly. "Thank you for calling to let us know. I will say this," the supervisor added before hanging up. "In 15 years of managing night shift workers, I've never had someone show such complete disrespect for the job, the company, and the people trying to help him succeed. I hope he learns from this experience." After Dad hung up, we all sat in silence for a moment. My brother finally looked up, and I could see he was preparing to make excuses or try to spin the story in his favor. "Before you say anything," Dad said, holding up a hand, "let me tell you what I heard. I heard that you were consistently irresponsible about showing up on time. I heard that you couldn't do the basic requirements of the job. I heard that you insulted your coworkers and supervisor. And I heard that you thought you were too good to do honest work." "That's not exactly what happened," my brother started to say. Then tell me exactly what happened, Dad challenged. My brother took a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought he might actually tell the truth and take responsibility for his actions. Instead, he launched into a story about unfair treatment, unreasonable expectations, and a hostile work environment. The supervisor had it out for me from day one, he claimed. He gave me the worst assignments and expected me to work twice as hard as everyone else, and my coworkers were jealous because they could see I was smarter than them. Stop, Dad said simply. What? Just stop talking. Every word out of your mouth is making this worse. Mom had been quiet during the whole conversation, but now she spoke up. Did you really tell your supervisor he probably never graduated high school? My brother shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He was being disrespectful to me first. That's not an answer, she said firmly. Did you say that or not? I might have said something like that, but he deserved it. Mom shook her head sadly. I'm disappointed in you. Not just about losing the job, but about how you lost it. That supervisor was trying to help you succeed, and you treated him terribly. He wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to control me. He was doing his job, Dad said, which was to manage employees and make sure they met basic standards of performance and behavior. Standards you couldn't or wouldn't meet. The reality of my brother's situation was becoming clearer. It wasn't just that he'd failed at one job. He'd failed in a way that showed fundamental character flaws. He couldn't accept authority, couldn't work with others, couldn't take criticism or feedback, and couldn't do physical labor without complaining. So what happens now? My brother asked. Now you face the consequences, Dad said. You've proven that you can't or won't do what's necessary to pay back what you stole. You've shown that you don't respect honest work or the people who do it, and you've demonstrated that you haven't learned anything from this experience. I can find another job, my brother said desperately. Where? Dad asked. Morrison Manufacturing is known for hiring people that other companies won't touch. If you can't succeed there, where exactly do you think you'll find work? It was a good question. My brother had now been fired from Morrison Manufacturing for attitude and behavior problems. Word gets around in a small town, especially about problem employees. Most local businesses would probably hear about his termination before he even applied. I'll look in other towns, he said. Maybe I need a fresh start somewhere else. With what money? Mom asked. You don't have a car, you don't have savings, and you've only worked for 6 weeks in the past year. How are you going to support yourself while looking for work in another town? The questions kept coming, and my brother had no good answers for any of them. He'd painted himself into a corner through his own poor choices and bad attitude, and now he was realizing that there might not be an easy way out. The final conversation happened 3 days after we learned the truth about my brother's firing. Dad had spent those days making phone calls to Morrison Manufacturing, to other potential employers, even to some family friends who owned businesses. The message was consistent. Nobody wanted to hire someone with my brother's attitude and work history. On Sunday evening, Dad called my brother into the living room. Mom and I were both there, though I got the sense this was more for witness purposes than because Dad wanted our input on his decision. I've spent the last few days trying to find you another opportunity, Dad began. I called 6 different employers to see if they'd be willing to give you a chance despite what happened at Morrison. 2 of them hung up on me when I mentioned your name. The other 4 said they'd heard about your attitude problems and weren't interested. My brother sat on the edge of the couch, looking smaller and younger than his 23 years. What about places outside of town? I called businesses in 3 neighboring towns, Dad continued. Same response. Word travels fast about problem employees, especially when they insult supervisors and get fired after 6 weeks. I didn't quit, my brother protested weakly. I was fired. You're right. You were fired for being disrespectful and refusing to do the work you were hired to do. That's actually worse than quitting. Mom had been quiet, but I could see she was struggling with what was coming. Despite everything my brother had done, he was still her son, and the maternal instinct to protect him was fighting against her disappointment and anger. There has to be something, she said quietly. Some place that would give him another chance. Dad turned to look at her with an expression that was both sad and resolute. Maybe there is, somewhere, but not while he's living here, eating our food, using our resources, and facing no real consequences for his actions. What are you saying? My brother asked, though I think he already knew. I'm saying you need to leave, Dad said simply. Today, tonight. Pack your things and find somewhere else to stay. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. My brother stared at Dad as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. Leave? Where am I supposed to go? That's your problem to solve, Dad replied. You're an adult. You'll figure it out. But I don't have any money. I don't have a car. I don't have anywhere to go. You had money, Dad said. $25,000 of my money. You chose to spend it on clothes and restaurants and a vacation instead of thinking about your future. Mom stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her back to all of us. I could see her shoulders shaking slightly, and I realized she was crying. Mom, my brother said, his voice cracking. You can't let him do this to me. She turned around, and I could see tears streaming down her face. Do this to you? Do you really think this is something your father is doing to you, instead of something you've done to yourself? I made mistakes, my brother said desperately. But I'm your son. You can't just throw me out on the street. You're not being thrown out on the street, Dad said. You're being asked to take responsibility for your actions and find your own way in the world. Something you should have done years ago. I'll change, my brother pleaded. I'll find another job. I'll pay you back. I'll do whatever you want. You'll find another job where? Dad asked. You've burned bridges with every employer in this area. You've shown that you can't handle authority, can't work with others, and think you're too good for honest work. I'll go to another city. I'll start over somewhere new. With what money? Mom asked through her tears. How will you get there? How will you eat while you look for work? How will you pay for a place to stay? The questions kept coming, each one highlighting how completely unprepared my brother was for independent adult life. He'd never had to budget money, never had to find his own housing, never had to worry about basic survival because our parents had always provided everything he needed. You could give me some money to get started, he suggested, just enough to get on my feet somewhere else. Dad's laugh was harsh. Give you money after you stole from us? After you've shown that you can't be trusted with money? After you've proven that you'll waste whatever you're given? Please, my brother said, and for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded genuinely frightened. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to live on my own. Then you'll learn, Dad said, the same way millions of other people learn, by necessity. But what if I can't? What if I fail? Then you'll fail, Dad replied, and maybe that failure will teach you lessons that our support never could. My brother turned to me, his eyes desperate. David, please, tell them this is crazy. Tell them they can't do this. I looked at him sitting there, finally facing the consequences of years of irresponsible behavior, and I felt nothing. No sympathy, no desire to help, no urge to convince our parents to give him another chance. You stole from me for months, I said quietly. You stole from them. You had a job that could have fixed this, and you threw it away because you thought you were too good for honest work. This is what consequences look like. I'll pay you back, he said to me. I'll pay everyone back. Just convince them to let me stay. How? I asked. You don't have a job. You can't get a job. You don't have any money or any way to earn money. What exactly are you going to pay me back with? He had no answer because there was no answer. He'd created a situation where he had no income, no prospects, and no resources, all while owing thousands of dollars to his own family. I need to pack, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. You have 2 hours, Dad said. Take whatever clothes and personal items you can carry. Everything else stays here. 2 hours? But where will I go tonight? That's your first adult decision to make, Dad replied. Choose wisely. My brother stood up slowly, looking around the living room as if he were seeing it for the last time. Then he went upstairs to pack, leaving the three of us in heavy silence. 2 hours later, my brother came downstairs with a duffel bag and a backpack. He looked lost and scared, younger than his 23 years, despite everything he'd done. This is really happening? He asked one last time. This is really happening, Dad confirmed. My brother walked to the front door, then turned back to look at us. I love you all, he said. I hope someday you'll forgive me. Then he walked out the door, and for the first time in months, the house was quiet. It's been 8 months since my brother walked out that door, and I'm writing this from the office of my own auto repair shop. Yes, I finally did it. The money I'd been saving, the money he'd tried to steal piece by piece, became the foundation for everything I'd dreamed of building. The first few weeks after he left were strange. The house felt different, quieter, but not in a bad way. It was like we'd all been holding our breath for years, and suddenly we could exhale. Mom went through a period of guilt and worry, wondering if we'd done the right thing, but Dad remained firm in his decision. He needed to learn that actions have consequences, Dad told her during one of their late-night conversations that I overheard. We failed him by protecting him from those consequences for so long. As for my brother, we heard bits and pieces about his situation through mutual acquaintances. He spent the first month staying with various friends, wearing out his welcome in each place as he complained about his circumstances and expected others to support him. Eventually, he ended up at a homeless shelter in the next town over. The shelter required residents to actively look for work and follow strict rules about behavior and sobriety. According to what we heard, my brother lasted 3 weeks before being asked to leave for arguing with staff and refusing to participate in job training programs. After that, the updates became sporadic and concerning. Someone saw him working as a day laborer for cash under the table. Another person mentioned seeing him begging for money outside a grocery store. Each piece of news was painful for my parents, especially my mother, but they held firm to their decision. The transformation in our family dynamic was remarkable. Without my brother's constant drama and financial demands, our parents began to see me differently. They started asking about my work, my plans, my progress toward opening my own business. For the first time in my life, I felt like they were actually proud of me. When I told them I'd saved enough to put a down payment on a small garage space, Dad insisted on co-signing the lease to help me get better terms. When I needed to buy equipment, Mom helped me research the best deals online. They became partners in my success instead of just spectators. 6 months after my brother left, I opened D&R Auto Repair, the initials standing for dependable and reliable, values that had finally been recognized and appreciated in our family. The shop is small, just 2 bays and an office, but it's mine. I earned it through years of hard work, saving, and refusing to give up on my dreams. My parents are regular customers now, bringing their cars to me for maintenance and repairs. They tell their friends about my business, proud to have a son who built something real and lasting. The contrast with how they used to dismiss my work and dreams is striking, but I've chosen to focus on the present rather than dwelling on past hurts. As for the money my brother stole, we never saw most of it again. The credit card company worked with my parents to reduce some of the charges, and the returned merchandise helped, but we still lost about $15,000. My parents had to delay some plans and tighten their budget, but they managed. About 3 months ago, my brother called our house. Mom answered, and I could hear her side of the conversation from the kitchen. He was asking for money, claiming he'd learned his lesson and just needed help getting back on his feet. He promised he'd changed and would pay back everything he owed. Mom listened for a while, then said quietly, "I love you, but I can't help you financially. If you want to have a relationship with this family, you need to prove you can take care of yourself first." He hung up without saying goodbye. That was the last we heard from him directly, though we learned through a friend that he'd moved to a larger city about 3 hours away. Supposedly, he was working at a restaurant and living in a shared apartment with several roommates. Whether this represents genuine change or just another temporary situation, none of us can say. What I can say is that his absence has allowed our family to heal and grow in ways that weren't possible when he was here. We've learned to value consistency over charisma, reliability over charm, and hard work over empty promises. My business is thriving. I'm making more money than I ever did as an employee, and I'm building something that will last. I've even started thinking about expanding, maybe hiring an apprentice, maybe adding a third bay. Dreams that seemed impossible when I was constantly worried about money being stolen from my room now feel achievable. Now, when I lock up my shop each evening and count the day's receipts, I think about the journey that brought me here. Every dollar I save, every customer I serve, every repair I complete successfully is proof that hard work and persistence pay off. My brother chose a different path. He chose immediate gratification over long-term planning, charm over character, taking over earning. Those choices led him to where he is now, just as my choices led me to where I am. I don't hate him for what he did. In a strange way, I'm almost grateful. His theft and the family crisis it created forced everyone to confront the truth about our dynamics. It made our parents see the difference between a son who takes and a son who builds. The house is still quiet in the evenings, but it's a peaceful quiet now. A quiet filled with possibility rather than tension. A quiet where I can finally breathe freely and plan for a future that belongs entirely to me. And that, more than any revenge I could have imagined, is the sweetest victory of all.